From the nation's capital, this is the Fly Fishing Consultant Podcast with your host, Rob Snowhite.
My name's Rob Snowhite, and I'm a fly fishing guide. I live just south of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. I started this podcast about 10 years ago to help educate others about fly fishing. This is episode 201. It's brought to you by Filson. You can visit them at filson.com. This episode features Alex Binsted. He works at Fletcher's Boathouse. It's located at Fletcher's Cove on the Potomac, just outside of Georgetown. The Washington Post calls Fletcher's Cove the greatest fishing hole in America, and it's located within 10 minutes of the White House. Now, Alex is not going to give us all of his secrets. That's like asking a barbecue pitmaster for the secret ingredients in their sauce or dry rub. You never hear Guy Fieri getting any secrets to a dry rub of what goes in there. They'll say some garlic, some paprika, some onion powder. He's not going to give you any specific logs, rocks, or eddies that he fishes, but take note of what he says. Alex and I have been out of work for the past week because we got a huge rainstorm. In the last podcast, I mentioned Jason was coming to town. Jason, Thomas, and I got out over last weekend. Thomas and I each got a snakehead, several carp, and Jason got into some carp and landed a big fatty. And it was a fantastic weekend. As I mentioned before, this podcast episode is brought to you by Filson. Filson was established in 1897. It is the leading outfitter and manufacturer of unfailing goods for outdoor enthusiasts. Their clothing and gear is built upon a reputation for reliability. They're a favorite among anglers and hunters, engineers and explorers, mariners and miners, and anyone who refuses to stay indoors. I will be doing a live podcast from their reopening of their new location on 14th Street Northwest in Washington, D.C. I will have more information about the opening and the live podcast I will be doing on my social media in the next several podcasts. So stay tuned. This is Alex Binsted, BinstedLures.com. I hope y'all enjoy this episode. All right, this episode we have Alex. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Alex Binsted. I am the manager at Fletcher's Boathouse in D.C.
For those that can't see you right now, is there a celebrity doppelganger you have that people could picture you as? People ever say you look like somebody?
No, other than Harry Potter, but that was years ago.
Yeah, if you had the round glasses, maybe.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about you first. We'll go to Fletcher's Cove and then Friends of Fletcher's Cove. You're probably one of the more, I want to say, knowledgeable people about this river. Share some of what you know about your fishing spot, your office, I guess we could call it, at Fletcher. So where did you grow up? I see you got DC plates on your car.
Yep. I grew up very close to Fletcher's. It was about a 10-minute walk from my first childhood house. And then my dad, being my dad, moved us even closer to Fletcher's to the point where if I ran, I could be there and back in under 5 minutes.
Oh, my goodness.
So pretty close.
Yeah. What high school did you go to?
I went to Wilson.
Okay.
And then I still live in the neighborhood now.
Nice. Short commute?
Yeah, about a mile away.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, which is the farthest I've ever lived, other than my college years. But
wow, where'd you go to undergrad?
I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. It's a design school.
Very cool. All right. When did you get into fishing? I imagine living that close to the river. Your dad's an angler. Did you get it all from him?
Yeah, my dad worked at Fletcher's when he was a kid and fished there when he was a kid and started me very young. He would have us practice casting, not fly rods at the time, but spinning tackle in our backyards. And I know, it would save him headaches later on getting tangles out on the river, but it was probably really to have us not embarrass him when we were out fishing, because my brothers and I were the best casters for our age, because we spent the winters in the backyard practice casting.
How many siblings?
2 younger brothers.
So he basically got you guys to row for him, I'm assuming. He
rowing
trained you to row boats.
No, funny enough, no. We did spend some time on the oars, but it was a lot of shad fishing or walking the canal, so there wasn't a heck of a lot of rowing going on.
Other than your dad, any big influences in fishing?
Locally, yeah. Mike Bailey, also known as Animal. I fished with him starting in high school. I remember going out, and that's when I learned how to row, because he would bark commands at me when we were striper fishing.
Right. Did you ever get out with Jim Range?
I did. That was back in the bait fishing days when we were using herring to catch stripers.
He had offered to take me out, and he said, "You got to get up at 4 in the morning, or meet me at 4 in the morning." And that was almost 20 years ago. I was like, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
And now I'm looking back on it, just pissed that I didn't go out with him.
Yeah, that was. I don't know that I ever fished in his boat, but I was definitely in boats next to him. You had to get up at 4 in the morning. You had to catch bait, and we had to catch herring first, which you had to start early. Then you had to row up to the hole, and you just sit there all morning. And there was a big class of rockfish in the mid 2000s.
Want to get into that later?
Sure.
Okay. I should make a note. So you basically grown up at Fletcher's, and I've also been told you build some of those boats?
I don't. We restore them every winter.
Okay.
So it's, for some of those in the age that they are, it's basically building them. You're stripping paint and fiberglass and a lot of woodwork on them. I've never built one from scratch.
Right. Why were the aluminum boats not used? That I bought from you guys, and that was hit by a drunk driver about 2 years after buying it.
Well, drift boats, that was a snafu with the Park Service. Someone higher up thought it'd be a good idea to get them. And there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, as it were, down there. We operate Fletcher's under contract for the Park Service, and I get a paycheck from a big parent company. But anyway, there's a lot going on, and so sometimes when somebody higher up has a good idea, or what they think is a good idea, we have to follow through. And so one day we had 4 aluminum drift boats, and drift boats are meant for going downstream.
Right.
And I need to get my boats back at the end of the day, so...
You also said before that people will ditch boats below the cove.
Yeah.
How did they get their credit card back?
I'm not going to hold their ID or credit card hostage. I never could really do that.
Not the authority.
I have a few bad Yelp reviews from my conduct after having to get the boats back.
All right, so you started off live lining, lure fishing, and when did you start fly fishing?
Fly fishing, we started... It was for carp on mulberries. So that would be after the shad season when the mulberries started coming out. This was when the C&O Canal had water in it. And there was a mulberry tree right at Fletcher's. And I had been fly tying for years, but that was a good, it was a good problem trying to figure out a mulberry fly.
Right.
And spent a lot of time doing that.
What'd you come up with? What's the final? Is it still a final product?
I do have a final one. Finally, I've never told anybody how I do it yet.
Okay, no worries there.
But we used to, deer hair flies, and we used to crush up mulberries to get the scent and put flies in a cup of crushed mulberries. And still, carp are pretty smart fish, so it took a while to really get it dialed in. But that was definitely my first experience is fly fishing. We're trying to outsmart carp.
And you're fishing now. What's the ratio of fly to spin?
It's still mostly spin.
It's definitely an advantage down at Fletcher's.
Yes, that waterway is critical, for spinning tackle for a lot of species and times a year. So there are certain situations where fly rods do quite well. The shad run being one, schoolie striped bass when it's low flow and low wind. Carp fishing is great, and there's some topwater opportunity later in the year. But you just have to pick and choose. I don't want to handicap myself on one specific thing.
Right.
I want to catch fish, and I may fish often, but in the grand scheme of things, there are plenty of people that fish more than me. And so, if I go out, it may be every day, but it's 1 to 4 hours, really never more than that. So I don't have a whole lot of time to get dialed in, and it's hard to get dialed. Like for the striper fishing, for instance, you have to start your morning trying to find fish. Once you find them, you're good. You can probably get a fly down to them, but I don't have all day.
Right.
Which is one reason I have to spin fish as much as I do.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Fletcher. So why is Fletcher's such an amazing spot? Is it the geography, the underwater topography, the flow?
It's a combination of a lot of things. The fall line, which is Little Falls, which is about 1.25 miles upstream from Fletcher's, is the natural stopping point for 99% of these spring run fish. So perch, hickory shad, American shad, and striped bass, they're going to be stopping there. It's a natural stopping point. So they get stacked in there pretty good to do their spawn or for striped bass to feed. And Fletcher's just happens to be the point where the flow, the speed of the current is ideal for targeting these fish. And, a lot of people come down there and they rent a boat or go up the shore and they want to hike up and down the river because they think the best spots are going to be far away or somewhere where people aren't. But I always tell them Fletcher's was built there for a reason.
Right.
And that's because there's fish right there. There's no need to overthink it. 90, and I don't know whether this is really cool or really pathetic, but I'm comfortable saying that 90% of the fish I've ever caught have been within sight of the Fletcher's dock, within 1/4 mile from Fletcher's. So I don't know how to feel about that.
If you're catching fish, that's all that matters. Who were the Fletchers? I met, was it Bob?
You would have met Joe and Ray.
Joe. I think he's the one of them sold me my boat. Or helped broker it.
Yeah, that was likely Ray.
Okay.
So the Fletchers have had some hand in the boathouse there from sometime in the mid 1800s to 2005 when Joe and Ray were the brothers running it in 2005, and they decided they didn't want it anymore. Their kids didn't want to take it over, and so that's when it became the Park Services to contract out. Ray came back on board with the new company in 2005 and worked for several years before he retired. But they still have, I worked with the Fletchers, and Dan Ward, who works at the Boathouse, still worked with the Fletchers. So we still have a lot of ties to them, and they come down and visit from time to time.
And their family's always just been running a fishing operation out of that spot?
Yeah. A lot of, primarily fishing. Canoes were a hugely popular thing prior to the kayak craze. So they had a lot of hand in that, and also bicycles.
All right. And historically, it was just in their family. They just decided to build a shack there. And
yeah, that was pre National Park Service back when it was a different time back then. I guess you could just pick your plot on.
Right.
I wish it was like back then. You could just pick a plot on the river and do your thing. So there's probably no brick and mortar thing for a while, but I imagine just a couple boats and a couple guys letting people out.
There's also some historical structures around there. There's an old chimney.
Yeah.
In the woods.
So prior to any of the Fletchers, there's that house there when you come down the driveway is the Abner Cloud House, which was completed, I believe, in 1803. But that was the house for a family that operated a mill there, grain mill, I believe.
Okay.
And that predates the canal. And then the canal was built, and there were various structures and things along the canal. And then over the years, just random. There was an old Boy Scout camp up about 1/2 mile up in the woods there. So yeah, there's a lot of history around.
And it's a notorious floodplain.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine all that stuff has gone through some underwater stages.
Yeah.
Especially this week.
Yeah, so a lot of those, there's not much left in the floodplain there. Fletcher's is just high enough where this week's flood didn't do anything to us, to the buildings, but we've had since 1975 Agnes, the 2 in 96, and there's 1 in 85, so maybe just four floods that have come into the building there.
Wow.
And then that building was built in the 70s. So then the other building on site was 1930s. And they had a lot of floods back then. If you look at the historic crest, it's kind of I think they had 2 in the 30s that were just bigger than anything we've seen in our lifetime. So
that Agnes, I want to have some of the old timers on TPFR post some stories about that have been here that long. I grew up hearing about Agnes, and it was just a disaster. Like everything was blown out.
Yeah, we just watched something on PBS about the Conowingo Dam in Agnes. It's pretty amazing.
Look that up. All right, so where exactly if you're going to throw a dart for people that are listening who aren't familiar with the Chain Bridge to Georgetown area, where would you say Fletcher's is located geographically?
I always describe it as 1 mile below Chain Bridge and 2 miles above Key Bridge on the river, of course, right off of Canal Road. So really, I mean, if you were by water, you'd be in Georgetown, and then you go up a mile and you're in the Fletcher's Cove area. So there's a lot of changes. It changes rapidly.
And it's pretty much
from city to or nothing.
Yeah, and there's nothing else out there. It's just Fletcher's
and my house.
Yeah.
The neighborhood in DC is Palisades, and that's a quiet neighborhood with no metro access. So there's not much.
It's pretty quiet. And the wildlife, I mean, you don't be surprised for deer and turkey. And
yeah, we see turkeys quite often, deer, in the spring, eagles, osprey, all sorts of stuff.
It's the Mather Gorge. So the other side's a canyon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we're still really understand how much of a drop off it is through there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what makes some of that water so interesting to fish too, because you do have that drop off coming from the Virginia side and then the Palisade from the DC side. And then really as you get down to Georgetown, it completely levels out and becomes the swamp that DC was built on.
Right. It's pretty deep above Georgetown, right? Like 180 feet in spots?
Only about 180, but definitely there's 100 plus by Key Bridge and down by the Kennedy Center. And then Fletcher's, you're looking at right out front, 12 to 18. Okay. And then there's plenty of 25 to 30 and deeper than that if you want.
Know where all those deep holes are.
Yeah, and I avoid them because I don't like catfish.
Catfish are down there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. A lot of the striper fishing is, at least when they're feeding, maybe they hold or suspend in that deep water, but when they're feeding, they're in that relatively shallow 12 to 18 feet.
So you know what species you're going after, what spot to fish, like be it a smallmouth, a walleye, striper?
Yeah, I know what. A lot of times, shad fishing, you're clearly targeting shad. When I'm fishing for stripers, it's very common to get bycatch of walleye. June, which is quickly approaching here, is actually my favorite month to fish. And you get a mix of all species, and you're kind of just out there fishing because you really never know.
Right.
That's one of the great things about it.
Consider that with the Potomac. You really never know what you have until you land it.
Yeah, you really don't.
Sight casting a carp the other day, and we picked up a snakehead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never know. That was Tidal Basin.
Yeah. All right, so some characteristics about. You already mentioned there's deeper spots. There's a certain flow. How does the actual cove make that stretch of river different? I mean, why did they specifically build Fletcher's there?
Well, the cove allowed a protected area for a dock and a business operation. So I imagine that was a lot of it. From a fishing standpoint, it provides quick safe haven for high water events like the one we just had. Any fish that was out in the channel can quickly duck into the cove. It's creek fed there, so there's a cooler water source. We get all sorts of different species that come up and hang out in the cove itself, likely because of temperature change or other reasons, or because that's where the beta, the minnows come up there when it gets sunny. Yeah, it can't hurt the fishing, that's for sure.
And then they can also just take a huge break up there, catch their breath before they go up to Little Falls.
Yeah, so there's various coves along the way, and they all are pretty good hot spots to fish. Whether you're fishing in the protected eddy itself or out in the current, they're often in that general area because that's where bait could be holding, or that's where the bigger fish want to rest. Or
we notice a lot that boats will line up. Mm-hmm. Is that right where there's a drop off?
The boats line up. That's primarily shad fishing, and they're lining up on what we call the seam, or it's really the edge of the current where the current meets the slack water, the eddy, which it's just a visual clue as to where the shad like. It's that mix between not enough current and too much current. And it gives them the chance if they're resting in the slack water, you have access to casting in the slack water. If they're down deep in the current, from that spot where you're anchored, you can fish.
And speaking of anchor, you use what I believe are referred to as Arkansas anchors.
Never heard that term, but that makes sense.
And there's Arkansas anchors. There's Alabama Samsonite, which is a trash bag for your clothes. There's Canadian tuxedo, which is denim on denim. Things have different terms. So you guys just use river rocks tied to a rope?
We use river rocks tied to a rope. The craggy bottom there, you lose a lot of anchors. So if you have a private boat and you come up with a $30, $40 anchor, be prepared to lose it.
Were you paying attention to the news last week when the senator said that sea level rising is because rocks are going into the water? So you guys are contributing to the sea level rise every time you have to cut an anchor off.
It is funny. The tides are now higher because of siltation, which is weird to think.
Yeah,
but it's true.
When did you start noticing that?
So we have this concrete. The dock was always for years attached to this concrete walkway, and that was fixed in the ground. It wasn't moving, and as the years went on, the tide just kept going higher and higher over it. So I think as you get silt that washes down, it displaces the tide, and so the water has to come up over it.
Right.
And so we had to build a new walkway on top of it.
We'll get to that with the third part. Let's see what else. And then who named all those rocks? For a while there was the shadfishing.com and the Google map.
Yep. So the rocks, each rock at Fletcher's, or almost each rock, has a name and a story behind it. And a lot of them predate me and any living person today. So we found an article, I believe it was from 1909. In one of the Washington newspapers back when they actually wrote about outdoor and fishing activities. But they had a map of the Fletcher's area, and a lot of these rocks were the same names, same spots that we're fishing today. And then I have a book from the 1957, that it was the same, verified some of the similar spots that we fish with some of the same names. So it's kind of
interesting.
Yeah.
Where'd you find a book that had that?
It was a gift from one of the Fletchers.
Okay.
Called Fishing the Potomac, and it was something about that.
Itty bitty one. Little pamphlet.
Yeah, little pamphlet, but it had a little thing on Fletchers and just a little map. A crude map that was not to scale, but it had spots that I know I fish today, like the Parlor and something that they called the Bass Hole, but I know I've caught a lot of bass in what was known as a bass hole. They have a picture of Julius Fletcher, Ray and Joe's dad, holding a stringer of smallmouth. I mean, these are all 19-inch plus fish. Wow. I mean, just massive stringer of smallmouth.
And you get those on tubes.
Tubes. So we get them on flies and jigs, but he caught these in the spot,
on the same spot
that I fished today. So it's kind of neat.
So the shoreline, it's not easy to walk on down there.
No,
I prefer to fish from a boat than shore.
Yeah. I mean, the shoreline it can be great for shad fishing. There's plenty of spots to get a line out to the current for shad. But for any of your striped bass, for your smallmouth, any of that stuff, it helps to cover ground. Because even if you have an idea where these fish are, they might not be there on that particular tide or day or whatever. So you do have to move around a lot, and that's when a boat comes in handy.
I'm also worried with all those log jams from the flood. So there's just gonna be some huge snake in there that's gonna bite me. That they're gonna blend in.
Yeah, seen fair share of copperheads.
Yeah, I don't like when I walk down to the bottom of the cove. I'm always stepping and kicking things, and then waiting a couple seconds, and then taking another step.
Yeah, you're more cautious than I am. I should take a note.
Yeah. Let's see, what else? So what other species are in there? You mentioned shad, stripers, smallmouth.
Well, we have our anadromous species that come up in the spring. So that's hickory shad, American shad, herring, striped bass, which come from the ocean and there are resident striped bass that come up from the lower Potomac in the bay, and white perch. For our resident fish, we have the invasive blue catfish, channel catfish, smallmouth bass, largemouth bass. It's probably a 90 to 10 split in majority of smallmouth over largemouth right now. There's gar that come up from downriver to spawn this time of year.
Anyone catch something down there that no one was expecting? Like a brown trout or a brook trout?
Yeah, I think that there was one rainbow trout caught this year. We see a muskie every few years.
No one's caught a sturgeon?
There's been stories of sturgeon,
right,
from some of the old timers. Paula has a story of 3 Hispanic guys on the Virginia shoreline carrying a sturgeon out on their shoulders together.
Wow. Do you want to talk about Paula now?
It's never a bad time to talk about Paula.
So she worked the dock?
Yeah, so she
quote unquote worked?
She predates me, but one day she just, from my understanding, just showed up at Fletcher's and asked for a job, and they had their doubts that this tiny lady could handle the stress of working the dock. And she proved everybody wrong. She ran that dock for years by herself. And I mean, she would outwork teenagers, and, you know, she would do the work of 2 or 3 teenagers.
Wow. And the last time I saw her, I bumped into her on M Street in Georgetown, and she didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just want to get a picture with you. She's like, all right. She puts her backpack down and takes out deer antlers and puts them next to my head while my wife takes a picture. And then we keep walking, and my wife's like, what the F was that? That's Paula. Yeah. You didn't hear any profanity out of her, which was bizarre.
Yeah.
And then she found the guns.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell that story?
I don't know if I should or not. It's never stopped me. Yeah, a couple winters ago.
It was right before the Trump election.
It was right before yeah, exactly. I happened to be passing by Fletcher's. We were closed, so I wasn't working there at the time. But I saw there were news. You know, there's a news crew up there on the canal bridge, and I lingered just long enough to hear them say something about guns. And I said, oh, crap. Because it's never, you know, whenever there's any story, they're always going to say Fletcher's Boathouse, dead body, gun. You know, they're going to have all these keywords that do not bode well for that business. So I paid some extra attention to that one. And everybody joked later that whenever I told anybody in my company, they always told me that they found my guns. And so I had to reassure them that they didn't find mine. But anyway, the news story, all that they said was that a woman found a gun in a violin case at Fletcher's, and they didn't say what woman, but I had a very funny feeling I knew what woman it was.
It wasn't just gun; it was a bucket of guns. Yeah, like a bucket too.
Yep.
And no one's ever figured out what the deal was.
If they did, they're not telling us.
Yeah.
So
weird.
Yeah, she found. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. So we mentioned fish species. You don't like the blue cats. What about gizzards?
Don't like gizzards. I didn't mention them at all. That's how much I don't like them. So gizzard shad are a freshwater resident fish, unlike their saltwater cousins. They're really a trash fish. They're gizzard shad, mud shad, winter shad would they're all share the same name, but they don't typically take a lure in the mouth. So you snag them by accident a lot, and they'll just kind of stack in close to the shoreline. So you do snag them a lot as you retrieve. And perhaps the main issue with them is people mistake them for hickory or American shad. So you get people that come back and, oh man, I had a great day and caught 20, blah, blah, blah. And then they show you a picture of a gizzard shad. And
are they touching it?
Oh, they're touching it. Yeah, they stink. Yeah, I try. I'll touch most fish. I touch plenty of blue catfish, but gizzard shad, I take the pliers and just shake them off the hook no matter where they're hooked.
Now there's some flatheads making their way upriver.
Yeah. I caught a flathead the day before this river came up. It was about 8 pounds.
Wow.
They're cool. They're cool fish. I know they're invasive too, but
Did you bonk it over the head?
I didn't. Unlike blue cats, flatheads, they fight better and they don't slime your line. If you've ever had the displeasure of catching a blue catfish, you'll know you have to clean up after it 5 minutes after you land it. So the flatheads, they fight quite well. It keeps you. I haven't caught enough of them, so when that fish bit my jig, I had no idea what I had for a while. So at least, a blue cat, they bite and you kind of know instantly by the way they fight. But yeah, I'd welcome more flatheads. I know they'll eat everything, but I'd rather have flatheads than blue cats. Yeah.
So let's talk about what we're going to use to catch specific fish. So if someone's got to come down there with a fly rod, you want to break down what would be needed to get into fish, what flies, lines.
Yeah. So fly fish, if you're going to start fly fishing at Fletcher's, that would probably mean you're going to shad fish. It's the most accessible fish we have with fly tackle. So you're looking at anywhere between 6 to an 8 weight, ideally. A sinking line, that's critical. Floating lines will not do it with that amount of current. I know there's some places you could shad fish with a floating line, but not in the Potomac. And then shad flies are just, anybody can tie them. They're super easy.
You've got your own pattern?
Got my own pattern, but it's not all that different from everybody else's pattern. It just has to be small and bright and have some weight on it. And and then you cheat off of everybody else fishing around you and you'll catch fish.
Just ask, what was that bitten on? What color?
Yeah, it's a lot. You don't even have to ask questions. You have to, a lot of fishing and, is for not just Fletcher's, but observation of what's going on around you. People go out there and they don't watch everybody else, but you have to keep an eye on, because if someone's catching fish 300 yards downstream from you, you should probably, and you're not, you should probably move down there.
Right. What about if you target other species from the boat with the fly rod? Mm-hmm. Clousers, pretty standard.
Clousers, pretty standard. A lot of these fish, your striped bass, your smallmouth, and your walleye in the Fletcher's stretch are going to be hugging the bottom. There's not many opportunities for suspended fish that aren't shad.
Are they down there just because the current is so fast, or is it the structure that they want to hang out in?
They're definitely hiding. They're down there, and there's probably some current breaks behind boulders and rocks that we can't see down on the bottom of the river. It's probably where the bait is. But for whatever reason, over the years, you just don't catch. You might pick up one or two, but you're not catching these fish unless you're touching bottom with something, which makes fly fishing there a challenge. With the speed of the current, the depth of the river, it's hard to get a fly down and stay in the strike zone for a long enough time. But when you do, it can work quite well. You just have to pick and choose your time on that. So like last June, we had a great schoolie bite, and the river was down at 3.5 feet on the Little Falls gauge. No wind to put a belly in your line. None of that. And we anchored up, and we were doubled up on schoolie stripers all morning long. And,
that part of your job is going out to fish, because you have to know what they're biting on and where.
I tell myself that. Yeah. That's how I justify fishing.
It's like a chef that has to taste their food.
Yeah. Yes, it is very important to be able to point people in the right direction. That's a very rewarding part of the job, is when somebody comes back and they've caught fish off of your advice. So,
do you have an FAQ where someone asks the same question? You're just like, look at the sign.
I probably should. For the really common ones, the whole staff answers at the same time, and it's got to be somewhat embarrassing for the person asking the question. But
my neighbor Don next door, he's got this contraption on his roof. It's made of beer cans duct taped together, and somehow it absorbs the solar energy and heats his house. And it looks like a coffin on his roof. Everybody that walks by with their dog, every guest on our backyard, I have to explain.
Yeah.
I said, Don, just put up a sign, and I can just point. I probably did it 6 times over this last weekend. Explained what it was. Like the mailwoman yesterday was like, what is that on the roof, by the way?
I'm going to look at that.
Yeah, you need FAQ. We need one for the tidal basin. We were going to put it all in shirts. Like just all the questions. You can just say, look at my back. So what about lures? I really don't know too much about lures. I know there's the pumpkin things you use.
Mm-hmm. So really, I mean, at Fletcher's for the bulk of the time, if we're not targeting shad, we are using bucktail jigs in a variety of sizes from 1.5 ounces in weight. That's up to 8 inches long. And that's for your big stripers in the springtime. You need that heavy weight to contend with springtime current and get it down to the bottom.
That's your quillback jig?
That's my quillback jig.
How long did it take to develop that?
So those, there's an old timer called Dickie Tehan who used to fish exclusively jigs, only jigs for every fish in the river. He had 1/8 ounce, inch long bluegill jigs up to 8-inch striper jigs. And that's all. He even used jigs for shad. And he was my neighbor growing up, or one of my neighbors. But so he's like the original guy that used to use jigs, and it's a bucktail jig is a timeless fishing lure. My jig was kind of honed in over the years when herring became banned and we couldn't use it anymore for bait.
And was that just because the numbers were low?
That was because the numbers were low. And so we were forced to change our tactics. And honestly, I'm having a lot more fun now that we can't use bait. It's, people come up and they complain about not keeping herring, but honestly, you catch more fish on, if you know what you're doing anyway, you catch way more fish on artificials.
And you're tying all these onto that old Regal?
Yeah. Yeah. That thing won't die. That's the best vice around. One of the other old timers at the Boathouse gave me that, and I've been using it for years. But yeah, some of my early attempts at jigs I still have a couple that turn up from time to time in random tackle boxes from customers, but they, it's just one of those it's a design process. And that's what I went to school for, not necessarily for fishing lures, but you just hone it down and make it work. And now we're at its final, it's a kind of a constant evolution, but
that's what makes it fun.
Yeah. And so you're always trying to stay on top of the fish and what they want.
Very cool. Any colors for different times of season? Otherwise,
white is your easiest.
Looks like perch.
Looks like perch. Looks like herring. Put a little flash in there, a little bit of red flash, and that's been the go-to for stripers is white. We did in the last couple of years started tying darker color jigs. These fish when the herring aren't in, they'll sometimes eat smelt. And that goes for even mid-season. Sometimes the herring there'll be a lull, so they'll be eating something else. Or the smaller fish don't want to go through the effort of eating a whole herring, so they'll eat a smaller bait, smelt or other bait fish. And that's also the case in June when the schoolies are around. Not as much herring, so you got to downsize your bait and match the hatch, as it were. So smaller brown gold jigs, and that's something we really just figured out in the last couple of years.
What kind of rod are you using to throw those?
Really relatively light tackle. So for 3/4 ounce up to 1.5 ounces, we're using 6 foot or even a few inches shorter medium action rods with size 2500 Shimano reels on them with only 10-pound braid. And the reason for all of that's one of those things, just like the jig got kind of honed down and narrowed in, the tackle had to do the same. You have to, it's critical, as we've stated, critical to be able to hit bottom. That's where the fish are. So this light tackle allows you to get to the bottom and feel it.
You just sit there and just bob it up and down?
Yeah. Well, that's
what jigging is. That's
what jigging is, except there's a lot of nuances to it. You have to bounce bottom, but if you don't feel bottom, if you get your jig to the bottom and you don't feel it, you're snagged and you lost a $10 jig. And then you're not fishing when you're tying new jigs on. So that's the difference between 10-pound braided line on your spinning reel and 20-pound braided line. The 20-pound braided line is going to have less sensitivity. It's thicker, so it's not going to sink as well. The sink rate's not going to be you're not going to get that same defined tap of the jig on the bottom. So there's minute details that are critical in this application.
Okay. What about bait? You can't use herring anymore.
Yeah.
I know that for catfish, it's gizzard shad.
Yeah,
chicken
catfish. I don't really do much bait fishing anymore, but catfish, just getting anything down to the bottom. For smallmouth and walleye, if you went through the effort of catching smelt, shiners, whatever minnows are swimming around, or even little tiny bluegills, and got those to the bottom, that'd be very effective.
All right.
Or you put them under a bobber.
As a kid, we used Spam for bait. Spam worked really well. That was more still water.
Yeah.
I've not fished bait.
People catch catfish on hot dogs. I don't know why people even buy bait from me at Fletcher's. All you would have to do is dig up a worm and catch one bluegill and catch a catfish with the bluegill and
right.
Cut up your catfish, and then you got unlimited catfish bait.
Yeah, I see people go down to 4 Mile with ultralight rods and just catch a ton of little bluegill and then throw them in their car and they drive upriver.
Yeah. Yeah, that's accurate.
Okay. Let's see. How long are you just down there when the boathouse is open, or do you fish all year?
I fish. The only month I haven't caught a fish at Fletcher's in would be January at this point. So depending on the weather, February, things can get going with walleye. They're going to start their spawn first. Your smallmouth are going to start their kind of pre-spawn migration rituals early on.
And y'all have a record of first fish caught, last fish.
Yeah. So each year, there's always a unspoken tournament between the regulars of who's going to get the first of any given species.
Okay.
And so that's something that's pretty well documented over the years. The first fish, and then we try to keep records for the rest of the year, but it's harder.
All right. How's the river and the fishing changed? So we already mentioned the tides changed. You mentioned that the 2000s had a good run of stripers.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen fluctuations in your time? Do you hear stories from your dad compared to?
Yeah. So it's a constantly evolving thing. The stripers back in the 80s was at the moratorium.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So stripers were banned entirely in the 80s from being kept. Prior to that, they would fill boats and up to the gunnels and
wow,
and bring them in. I mean, just 12-inch to 15-inch fish, and that's just what they did. And then they went on moratorium, and then because of that moratorium, that class of fish just became prolific. In the mid 2000s, they were our spawning fish.
Michael picked that up.
They were our spawning fish that would come up, and these fish were 20 to 50 pounds and plentiful. It was only a week or two early in the season, but there were some quality fish.
What are some of your personal bests out there?
Stripers, probably. We rarely put tape measures to things, but 50 inches would be my personal best striper. Damn. And that was a mid 2000s fish. We've caught 50-inch fish in the last couple of years. I haven't personally gotten one, but I've seen a couple caught on jigs. And then a lot of, not a lot, but enough 40-inch fish.
My goodness. You've pulled out some pretty big smallmouth.
Mm-hmm.
What's a good smallmouth for you?
At this point, I really specifically target the bigger fish, which are going to be hugging bottom and kind of hanging out in a school, unlike your small fish that you find upriver that might just be cruising solo in that shallow water. But a good smallmouth in the lower Potomac, I've seen bigger than 20-inch fish. The biggest I've caught, and I've caught a few, are 19 and a halves. And then when you fish for them, your average, if you're in that school of big fish, your average is going to be probably 17 and a half.
That's a good fight.
Yeah, in that deep water. Yeah.
All right. And the shad are usually, like, for me, the hickories are small, medium, or large. And then you either have large or huge Americans.
Mm-hmm. There's some small Americans, too. The little buck spawning shad are sometimes smaller than hickories. A lot of people mistake them for hickories.
Really? I don't think I've ever seen one, or I never knew.
You get American shad that are just smaller than hickory shad. This year was one of the best years for American shad.
We got huge Americans for sure this year.
And not just size, just numbers-wise. Everybody was catching them up and down the river. When I was a kid, this is another thing that's changed. When I was a kid, I was, granted, not as good of a fisherman as I am now, but I'd catch maybe 3 American shad a year, to the point where I remember, I don't know how old I was, but I had one hooked, and it got off at the boat, and I just started cursing in my I was under 10 years old, but just like screaming in my boat. Just
figured out you knew the bad words.
Yeah, just like pissed. Everybody's turning around looking at me like, why is this child yelling? But it was a big deal to hook an American shad back then, and then now it's not. Now kids are catching them.
Yeah. So this year from shore, we noticed big hickories early on.
Yeah.
And pretty decent Americans all throughout, but what was it, 4 major rainstorm events we've had?
Yeah,
it's been
nonstop. Yeah, up and down. Last May was kind of a similar deal, but yeah, it's springtime.
Yeah, we just did not get. Sometimes it's a hickory in every cast for us.
Yeah,
we just did not get that this year.
Yeah, I'd rather have the American shad. Early season, yeah, I guess it was a little rough for hickories with high water in April this year, whereas last year April was low and fishable the whole month. So that's when the hickories were here.
And the latest someone's caught a shad was June?
Mike Alper, one of our old-timer legends, he has caught one. This is in the 70s or something. Caught one on July 4th one year.
Wow.
That was a different climate back then.
Like a patriotic fish.
Historically, the shad run has always, it's been starting earlier and earlier each year. Last year was actually, it started early. I had an American shad hooked on February 25th, and the last one of the season was caught was on June 11th.
Okay.
June 11th, and in recent memory, that's the latest anybody's caught one, which is pretty damn late.
Yeah.
Long after most people stop fishing for them.
Right. Some of the craziest things you've seen down there? Any just absurd things? You mentioned floaters earlier. Have you ever been down there when they're looking for bodies?
When they're looking for bodies, I've never personally seen one.
Hopefully I don't.
Yeah.
People always ask me if I've come across dead bodies in someone's marijuana growing.
Yeah.
I think I'd be more scared to find someone's weed patch than a dead body.
Yeah, a dead body's not going to hurt you.
Right.
Someone protecting their weed patch will. I don't know. There's been a lot of crazy things over the years. I can't, off the top of my head, it's hard to, there's just been enough where they need to be prompted.
There are a lot of...
prompted by topic.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I want to say, just morons, or... I saw a guy swimming it up at Chain Bridge with the life jacket, then took it off.
Yeah. I saw 3 guys, and I mean, there's idiots every day. So it's easy to forget stuff. I had 3 guys at the crest at a 10-foot river at Little Falls Gauge on Sunday. Go out in Pelican kayaks, which are your like Kmart brand cheapest kayaks you can buy.
They must
no
have
skirt.
Like when Chris McCandless in Into the Wild went through the rapids on the Colorado River in a cheap kayak.
Yeah.
Probably looked like that.
Yeah. And these guys had, instead of life jackets on, they had backpacks that they were wearing in these open cockpit kayaks. And it's pretty hard to swim in a backpack.
Yeah. There's some Darwin. You guys should have Darwin awards you can hand out to people. Like, next time you're going to die. So let's finish off about Fletcher's before we get into the Cove issues. What do you guys sell down there? What should people bring? What shouldn't they bring?
Well, we have DC fishing licenses, so that's one of the few spots that has them.
Best price of any license anywhere.
Yep, $10 for a DC resident, $13 for non-res. and Fletcher sells, I think, more than 80% of all DC licenses. So good place to get that. We have a good selection of spinning tackle, both bait and lures, kind of specifically for this area. Not a whole lot of fly tackle. There's enough fly shops in the area for that, but we'll have shad flies in the spring. I mean, that's the fishing aspect of it. We have, other than the rowboats that we rent, of course, then we have, for recreational purposes, kayaks, canoes, paddle boards, and bicycles.
Yeah, hot dogs and Gatorades too.
Hot dogs, Gatorades, ice cream. Yeah.
All right. Porta potties are down there.
Full bathrooms.
Full bathrooms now?
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've been down there. Okay. Anything else about the fishing that I forgot to ask you, forgot to cover? Something.
Well, there's always something else. I mean, a lot of people forget about, they come down for the springtime and just do the shad. Everybody should do the shad, but you should always be ready to do something else. If you see me out there catching stripers one after another, you might want to have a striper rod in your boat just in case.
Right.
And then once the shad are gone, 95% of anglers are going to leave and go do something else.
So you don't have to get there before dawn.
You don't have to get there before dawn to get a boat. I mean, last June 3, 4, and 5 last year, there's like almost nobody else fishing. I had the river to myself, and I must have caught, over the course of that 3-day span, 150 stripers and, walleye and smallmouth and shad, and, nobody's out there competing with me. So don't sleep on Fletchers after the shad leave, because there are other opportunities.
Good to know. All right, let's talk about Friends of Fletcher's Cove. Mm-hmm. What is Friends of Fletcher's Cove, and why was it formed?
Well, the Friends group is spearheading an effort to have the Cove dredged. Over the years, the Cove at Fletcher's has filled in with silt. The reason this is happening is because when the metro system was being dug, all that fill dirt was dumped just upstream of the Cove at Fletcher's. So
is it because there was a road down there? Did you come down at night and dump it?
This was a legal by the book thing. It was just a different world back then.
Wow.
And so not knowing what changes would happen, this was, they just said, okay, dump your fill dirt here. And that's what happened, but it changed the hydrodynamics forever. So now, previously, a big flood would come and it would scour out all the built up sediment at Fletcher's. And it was just a natural process that went on for millennia, I guess. And just kept that cove clean and usable by us. After this sediment was dumped, it created, now during a flood, the water doesn't rush over that top bank the same way. The Fletcher's area becomes a giant reversing eddy that we're at the top of the eddy, and it just deposits silt every high water. So this high water we had last week, there's 3 to 6 inches of fresh silt.
My goodness.
Underneath where the Fletcher's dock goes. So over the years, this builds up, and there's been a couple maintenance dredgings in the past. And we need another one, but it's not like it used to be. Now you have all these environmental studies and stuff, and it costs more money. And so the Friends group is spearheading this effort to have this dredged, because our dock is larger than it used to be, but back in the day they had 50 rowboats. Now we only have 20, and we barely have half the time they're sitting on mud. So it's crippling our everybody's access to the river.
Right. Is it changing the fishery?
The siltation is really just, that's such a hyper localized thing. The Cove itself, when I was a kid, you could jump off the dock now, and going over your head. Now you jump off the dock and you're stuck in mud. So there are fish that used to come up in there. There's decent largemouth fishing, crappie, bluegills and stuff right in the immediate Cove there. And that was a favorite after school activity for me, was go down there and just catch bass in the creek, spinners, whatever. Super simple. Now half the time that's, it's filled in with at low tide, and at high tide you're relying on fish coming in there at every tide cycle. So they're just basically, there's no fish in there.
There's nowhere for them to go.
Yeah. So that was, in the grand scheme of things, no, it doesn't affect what's out in the main river, which is where most people are going to be fishing anyway. But it was a very quick and easy and very accessible spot to fish for bluegills, and good for kids, but no more.
And you're getting funding through grants, and we've done some fundraising events.
Yeah, fundraising, grants. So they have enough, believe we have enough to do the initial soil sampling, which is just to sample soils over $100,000.
My goodness.
Yeah, and that's not, and then dredging it is going to be.
They can't just put in those hoses they use for mining gold. They can't use that to push it all out into the river. And
you have to, you have to know what you're pushing out in the river, hence the soil sampling.
Right.
And then it's someone else's problem where you dump it. So it's not like all these agreements.
That's not a quick fix.
Yeah.
Everyone lives downstream.
Yep. So it is fascinating to see what one relatively minor change can do to the whole
every
system.
Major storm, you get a couple more inches of silt.
Yeah.
And
some of it works its way out. It'll compress and everything, but over the years, definitely, you wonder why we only have a few 20 rowboats and run out of rowboats before the sun comes up every day. We literally can't have more than that, because they'd be stuck on mud and nobody could use them anyway.
So you got to get down there at a high tide to get out on a boat?
We'll get them all out with 20 or 25 boats. We can get them all out regardless of tide. But if you had more than that, you just couldn't manage a fleet any larger than that with the tides.
Okay. Where can people find out about Friends of Fletcher's Cove?
friendsofFletchersCove.org, and Mike Bailey is the main spokesperson for that. And also he set up on that website, set up a river gauge link that has all our gauges and all the upstream gauges on the same page that you can look at very easily. So it's
having all those tabs on my phone.
Yeah.
And this time of year, I've been checking every hour, watching it go up and down.
Yeah.
It's stressful. It's like watching the hockey games right now. You watching tonight?
I guess I have to.
Where can
giving us some hope?
Yeah. Where can we find you online? You got Binsted Lures.
Yep, Binsted Lures on Instagram and a website, and I post a fishing report for Fletcher's on my website.
And you also do work with NCCTU? Is that?
I'm involved with them.
Right.
I did a talk for them a couple weeks ago, but on their website, I don't have anything immediate posted.
Okay. What's your outlook like for this summer?
This is why it's important to keep records, because when you get a flood like this, who knows what's going to happen after. I wish I had kept better records in 2014, the last time we had high water like this. I have a better idea what's going to happen once this settles down. But immediately, once this river becomes fishable again, sometime mid-next week, there will be schoolie stripers around. There's a pretty good chance that a handful of American shad around. Probably not enough for people who have never done it before to come out of the house and fish for them, but I will certainly be out there trying. We'll have good walleye bite and smallmouth bite in June. July, August always are going to be tough with the heat, but you could probably pick off a few smallmouth up by Little Falls, and then not much. It'll be similar to how it is every year.
All right. Anything else that I forgot to ask you? To cover, I think that little pamphlet book, you need to write an updated version with all your knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. I need to share. I always tell people I'll show them that book, and then it just sits on my bookshelf. Never show it to anybody. But yeah, no, it's someone needs to write a book.
Yeah. I think you're the one. No pressure.
Yeah.
You seem to be the most knowledgeable one, at least that we know of.
Yeah. I think there's definitely some people that have more knowledge for specific things, but I think all around, yeah,
That's why I wanted to have you on. I've been trying to get you on for a long time. It just never works out. But we got a flood, so we're both out of work this week.
Yeah.
Off season, you are where?
My mind is at Fletcher's, but my company, one of the advantages of working in a larger company is we have other sites. So I work at the ice skating rink downtown.
Nice.
And drive a Zamboni all winter long. And
Very cool.
yeah.
You get to work outside. You get to fish. You live right by the river. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That's why I'm still doing it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. Right. And people, go down and check out Alex at the Boathouse. Just look up Fletcher's Boathouse online.
Yep.
Pretty simple to find. And enjoy backing in or driving in there. It was easier when I had a Miata. If you go down there, I don't know about the new car.
Yeah.
Is that why you're not driving like a Suburban?
No, I just like to go fast.
Okay. Very cool. All right. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you for joining us for the Fly Fishing Consultant Podcast. For more information or to contact Rob, please go to www.robsnowhite.com.